In recent days, the region has entered a perilous new chapter. As the fragile architecture of diplomacy creaks under renewed pressure, the trajectory of peace initiatives appears ever more uncertain. The developments began when the Israeli military launched a fresh wave of operations in the Gaza Strip. Some 24 people were reported killed in drone and missile strikes in densely populated civilian zones. Officials say the death toll is rising fast, even as a ceasefire that went into effect earlier this month was supposed to hold. Pakistan's Foreign Office denounced the attacks as a blatant violation of international law, pointing to the loss of civilian life as proof that the truce is collapsing. Meanwhile, Lebanese authorities said that a drone strike on 18 November hit the Ain el-Hilweh Palestinian refugee camp near Sidon, killing at least 14 people and threatening broader spillover. These incidents occur at a time when regional peace dialogues and normalization efforts had appeared to gather momentum. The promise of new frameworks for Arab-Israeli understanding, once seen as a possible pivot away from decades of conflict, now hangs in question. In Jerusalem, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly emphasized Israel's right to defend itself. In public remarks, he stressed that militant infrastructure in Gaza must be dismantled, signaling that the government sees no alternative to a robust military campaign. Yet the very scale and intensity of the strikes are reigniting fears that any political or diplomatic opening will be undermined by cycles of violence. Across the region, partners and observers are watching closely, with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and other Gulf states having signalled interest in deeper ties with Israel. The timing of these attacks could not be worse. How can diplomacy flourish when bombs are falling, hostages remain enslaved in the conflict and humanitarian conditions rapidly deteriorate? A senior diplomatic source summarised the dilemma. With military reprisals ongoing, the very peace momentum built over the past year is evaporating. One analyst put it plainly: there is a risk that the groundwork for a broader Arab-Israeli deal will be laid, then shattered by unilateral military escalation. On the Palestinian side, the rhetoric has hardened. Leaders in Gaza and across the West Bank say their people cannot wait for incremental normalization, while children are being killed in bombardments. One civil society umbrella in Gaza described the situation as making a peace treaty on the edge of a crater. Internationally, the clock is ticking. Normalization talks had offered Israel a chance to break out of its long-running isolation and embed itself in a web of regional alliances. In return, Arab states had expected meaningful progress towards Palestinian statehood, steps to ease the blockade of Gaza and serious gestures on settlement and occupation. The recent flare-up threatens to reverse all of this. In practical terms, the Israeli government's coalition politics complicate matters. The Prime Minister's right-wing bloc includes ministers who oppose a Palestinian state, favour expanded settlements and view diplomatic concessions with scepticism. That means the window for compromise is narrow. With airstrikes continuing, it becomes harder for Israel to credibly promise the kind of political flexibility that would reassure Arab partners. Meanwhile, the humanitarian fallout is mounting. Hospitals in Gaza report extensive damage or collapse. UN officials warn that millions of civilians are at risk of starvation, disease and displacement. The fragile ceasefire entered into with great hope now appears closer to collapse than consolidation. On the Israeli domestic front, there is growing unease. Polls suggest a significant segment of the population fears that the government's military strategy is drifting without clear endpoint. Public protests have broken out, calling for accountability over intelligence and preparedness failures. The political risks for Netanyahu and his government are rising even as the war drags on. In diplomatic capitals, from Washington to Riyadh, conversations are shifting. US officials, while publicly supportive of Israel's right to defend itself, are increasingly cautious about the timing and cost of new operations. Arab states that had tentatively opened diplomatic doors now worry whether they will be painted as accomplices to an Israel-Palestinian-only settlement, leaving them exposed politically if civilian casualties mount or the conflict spreads. In this context, the role of mediation is under strain. Egyptian, Qatari and UN envoys are scrambling to contain the violence, but their ability to broker long-term understandings is constrained by the setbacks on the ground. One veteran mediator admitted to field correspondents that every bomb that falls weakens the handshake at the table. The effect on the broader region is palpable. Beyond Gaza, Lebanese and Syrian fronts are under renewed pressure. The Hezbollah-Israel border remains volatile. Iran-backed militia activity is increasing. Analysts say that what had once been a hopeful ramp-up in regional diplomacy is increasingly being overshadowed by security flashpoints. The eclipsing of hope by violence is not simply rhetorical. Already, Gulf states that were seriously exploring normalization deals with Israel are now signaling that the price they may pay, politically and domestically, is rising steeply. One senior Gulf official, speaking on condition of anonymity, noted that their publics will not tolerate perceived collusion if civilian casualties continue to mount. For Palestinians, the sense of betrayal is growing. The question now being asked, why should we accept normalization between Arab states and Israel when our lives continue to be imperiled? The peace track appears to many as a side deal while the main conflict remains unresolved and lethal. Still, some diplomats argue that the long-term logic of normalization remains compelling. They point to the shared interests of Israel and Arab states, countering Iran, advancing trade and energy integration, and creating a broader regional architecture of cooperation that could stabilize the Middle East. However, they stress that this logic is only credible if progress on the Palestinian question is real and violence is contained. From the vantage of Tel Aviv, the calculation is clear. If Israel can achieve stronger regional ties and a strategic advantage, the long-term payoff could outweigh short-term conflict. From the Arab capitals, the calculus is shifting. Are they willing to invest political capital now when the Israeli military campaign is intensifying and the humanitarian toll rising? At the heart of all of this lies the choice between balance and escalation, restore diplomacy or double down on force. In an interview last week, Netanyahu affirmed his position starkly. We will turn all the places where Hamas is organized and hiding into cities of ruins. Those words underscore the severity of the campaign and reinforce the obstacles to any meaningful bilateral progress. They also highlight why many observers believe the current trajectory is taking the region further away from peace, not closer. For the peace initiatives to survive this moment, three things must happen. First, a credible cessation of hostilities with independent monitoring. Second, tangible and transparent progress on Palestinian rights, especially Gaza's blockade and West Bank occupation. Third, genuine assurances to Arab states that normalization will not be undermined by recurrent military surges. Without all three, the emerging architecture of regional cooperation may unravel. What looked like a diplomatic breakthrough just months ago is now facing the risk of becoming yet another footnote in the cycle of conflict. As the smoke from airstrikes darkens the horizon, all sides must ask, will we choose the harder path of peace and compromise or the easier path of repeated escalation? The answer to that question will shape the Middle East for years to come.